I'm joined tonight by Joe Mirabello of Terrible Posture Games, and we are going to be talking about his game, Mothergunship. So thank you, Joe, for taking a little bit of time to talk to us about the game and your background as a developer.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So, to get things rolling, for people that haven't run into Mothergunship, why don't you give us a pitch in your own words of the game?
Sure. So, Mothergunship is a very fast-paced, bullet hell first-person shooter with one of the most unique crafting systems you've ever seen in a first-person shooter. It's actually, I should correct you a little bit before you said it was my game. This is much more than me. This game is being co-developed by Terrible Posture Games, which is me, and Grip Digital,
Right.
who have done quite a few games, including helping me port my last game, Tower of Guns, to consoles. This game is Grip and I working together from the ground up to make something that shares a lot of the DNA of Tower of Guns, but is entirely new and is incredibly fast-paced and actiony, and with that crafting system is something that we've never seen before.
Right. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because one of the things I wanted to touch base with you on is the kind of evolution of the game from Tower of Guns. Because Tower of Guns and Mothergunship, you can very clearly see kind of where one has evolved out of the other. And I wondered if you might first talk about kind of how the idea for Mothergunship evolved, and how it came out of Tower of Gunship, and your relationship with Grip Digital, and how, kind of how it got birthed, so to speak.
Sure. So many years ago, I made a game called Tower Guns, which was a single-person project. I say single person very loosely. Like, I had a lot of help while I was building it, but it was pretty much just a single-person project.
Mm-hmm.
My brother did some of the work did the music, actually, and then along the way, I was like a Katamari ball, picking up like help with QAing it, or companies that would help me bring it to other platforms. But one of those companies was Grip Digital, who saw how the game was doing on PC and was like, "Are you interested in bringing this to consoles?" And that was back in like 2014, 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and we just never really stopped working together. After that, we kind of took a look at Tower of Guns and were like, we learned a lot from here. There's some things that people really responded to.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things that were not quite as successful, because the game definitely feels like it was, well, basically an experiment. And so we're like, let's take Tower Gun, treat it like a prototype, and build something new off of that together from the ground up. And so that's what that's what led to Mothergunship. Along the way, we kind of stripped out all of the stuff that from Tower of Guns that was not working as well. All the stuff that people were criticizing about the game, we tried to address directly. We were listening as close as we could to what the reception was with Tower of Guns. And then also we were adding in things that we felt would make the game stronger based off of that feedback as well. So a good example would be something like co-op. Tower of Guns, that was the number one requested thing. They were like, this is great being able to run around and shoot and play in this like bullet hell first-person shooter climate, but it would be a lot more fun to do with a friend. And we're like, all right, let's see if we can do that from the ground up.
Cool.
So Mothergunship has basically got that. We're aiming for co-op from the ground up, basically. From day one, we were like, okay, how do we make co-op work? How's it going to play? So
very cool.
Yeah, it's basically, that's kind of the little history in a minute.
Right. That's perfect. You mentioned this crafting system, which I think if anybody is seeing the footage we've kind of got going on in the background, or has seen like kind of gameplay of some of the demos that have been out at different shows for Mothergunship, it like you said, it's the thing that stands out. But I have to imagine that letting players build their own weapons has created some problems, and has created has created some very broken combinations. So, two-part question. I hope you talk about like the kind of the challenges of letting us, the players, mess around with that and build these things, these ridiculous contraptions, and then maybe let us know the most broken thing you've ever seen somebody create in one of these demos.
Well, okay, so you have to step back a little bit. Yes, you can make stuff that is really, really like breaks the game balance, or makes the game entirely overpowered, or is entirely absurd and not something that's actually fun to use. You can totally do that in the system. For the listeners, the system is basically playing with Legos. You have a couple of different kinds of pieces you can mess with: barrels, connection points, like kind of junction pieces, and then caps, which terminate a chain of parts and do funny things to the game, to the gun, like on a whole. So a good example of this would be you have these, the connection pieces, and you put 2 or 3 of them in a row. I'm actually going to illustrate in a little picture of myself. You have 2 or 3 of them in a row, and then you have like maybe a barrel or maybe 2 or 3 barrels that point forward, and then those could be like chain gun barrels, and then you have a cap that adds bounce to all of the shots. So all of a sudden, all the shots from all the chain gun barrels are going to bounce all over the place.
Right.
And you can do whatever you want. We really don't limit what the player can do, and that's philosophically something we wanted from the very beginning, was to say, okay, every other game likes to say, not every other game, but a lot of other games that let you have some kind of like crafting system in first-person shooters have a lot of ways that they say no. In fact, we were looking at a lot of other first-person shooters and like, how do they do crafting? And in a lot of cases, it was either cosmetic. Here, you can change your gun's colors, or you can put a new skin on it, or it's very predetermined paths, like you can choose option A or option B, but they both look cool, but it's option A or option B, and that's it. Or it's very grounded in reality, like here, add a scope, add a a sniper, not sniper, add a silencer, add a new stock. It's very, very grounded in the physical world. And so we from the very beginning, we're like, let's get away from all of that. Let's go with something that's way more modular. Let's put the power in the hands of the players. Let's give them these toys to mess with. And then the problem isn't that they made bad guns. Yes, they're going to make bad guns. The problem is, how do we as designers from the very beginning accommodate that? And so there's a lot of things that we have to do to say, okay, we know that's going to be a problem, but it's not a problem in this game because this game is designed for that. How do we solve it when it does happen instead of trying to prevent it from happening? And that's there's no real right or wrong when you're talking about game design, but there is or this game design at least, there is a prioritization of creativity here, letting the players express themselves in a way that we hadn't seen in a first-person shooter. This is more like how you'd express yourself in a space simulation game where you're like adding engines and thrusters and wings and stuff onto your spaceship. Have you played? There's quite a few of them, space sim games where you can like build your own ships.
Yeah, sure.
Right, that's kind of what I'm talking about. This is more like the kind of creativity you'd get in those kind of games. We want to apply to the gun system.
I can absolutely see what you're talking about, and it's great to hear that was something you kind of were looking for from the ground up. It's kind of like integral to the spirit of the game.
Right, and it's things really weird. Trust me, man. It's we can build some really silly stuff, and to get to your question, that's like, how do we stop that from not happening, but how do we stop it from being a long-term problem?
Right.
Because when players build something that's really over the top, that's fun. They're having a good time. You just have to make sure that it doesn't, overstay its welcome. So instead of saying no, we say like, okay, that was cool, but there's a bunch of positions along the way in the game that say like, okay, you had fun with that now. Let's try something different. Let's encourage you to do something different. As you play the game, we have those kinds of like, you wouldn't really call them sanity checks, but there's like ways that are the players encouraged to like step off of the overpowered bandwagon.
Gotcha.
And in some cases, they're actually not the overpowered bandwagon. Sorry, the overpowered wagon rather. In some cases, the limitation is pretty much immediate. Like if you add 100 parts to your gun, each part costs a little bit more to fire, so you're going to churn through energy faster. And you have unlimited ammo, but it is kind of like an overheat meter, so you can overcharge your gun fast. You could build that gun that has 40 barrels, but you may only be able to fire it once every 10 seconds. You could. That's totally a valid strategy. And as you play the game, you may find that upgrading your energy allows you to build those crazy guns a little bit more freely. But along the same time, each level that you play the game is kind of like a mission with its own set progression that, like I said before, it invites you to experiment with what the options are in front of you, not build the most insane, elaborate contraption you can every single time. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes that's fine, but not every time.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, in the demos I played, I first played the demo for Mothergunship last year, 2017. Started messing around with it, and then I played it again this year. And it's great. It's great fun to get in there and start trying to move stuff around, even in the limited scope that a demo is giving you. Nice. It's a really solid system. One of the things that surprised me this year, though, was that we started getting a kind of like a sense of the story that you're building. Which really surprised me, because when I first saw the game in 2017, it felt very gamey, so to speak. It's like it's more like we're talking about fun mechanics, this fun building thing. We're less worried about that. And then when launching the demo in this most recent version, you've got a commander talking to you, and there's a lot of little story elements. It was surprising, and I wondered kind of if you could talk about that evolution of taking something that's very mechanically based and adding a narrative to it. And it's very clear from the bits of story you see, you've got some very old school inspirations in it.
I definitely do. Yeah. Like there's lots of old school inspirations. I mean, we wear our hearts on the sleeve in regards to what we found to be really inspiring, especially for either tone or for even gameplay. So we can get into that later, but to get to the story, I'm trying to figure out when you played it in 2017 because we showed the game in so many different places. I can't remember what state the story was in. It's something that at PAX East.
Yeah.
So did we have no story at PAX East? Maybe we didn't.
There was very, very minimal, kind of just like you're going room to room. It was very much a change of pace this year when you've got a commander kind of talking to you and giving you a little backstory of what's going on.
Right. So even now, from what you've played to what the game is currently, like that particular commander has taken a backseat role to other different characters who've kind of been elevated. So we've juggled a lot, and it's very much an evolving process, which is how I think a lot of games should be if they're designed to be mechanic first. A good example of this would be that crafting system. Okay. So that crafting system is absurd. Like you can do really weird things with it, and that's okay. That's totally encouraged. And because it's encouraged, it means that this game can't be there. I just moved my little window up there, so now I can be looking at the camera instead of looking down. So it's like that's like because that system is so absurd, you can't have a seriously toned game. This kind of Lego modular system can create a serious game if it's that space simulation 4X kind of thing I was talking before.
Right.
But in a first-person shooter, you're building really elaborate 40-barrel contraptions. And then, can you imagine seeing those in co-op? Like, you're going to see your buddy with that gun? It's not serious. So, it's like, that informed the tone, which then informed, okay, here's the scaffold we need to work around, which then informed what kind of gameplay elements we actually have and how they build, how they can interact. And, I don't want to say we started first with the mechanics entirely because there was a certain story elements that we wanted to pull in that were already a little lighthearted in tone, but the tone has been matured and been refined by the mechanics themselves, and I guess informed is the best word, and iterated on. And the best thing I can say right now is that it's a little bit kind of like how Contra or Metal Slug is. It's like they're not serious, but if you were 8 years old, you might think they were, But if you're paying attention, you're like, whoa, this is really ridiculous.
Yep.
And it's like, that's great. That's the space I want to be in. It's over the top. It takes itself seriously, but it's not serious if you actually stop to think about it.
That's a perfect analogy. The Metal Slug analogy is spot on.
Yeah,
great.
That's kind of the over the topness we're going for, where it's like, okay, anything goes in this world. You're not, like, the player should have no idea what they're going to experience next, because what they experience next could be something really over the top or it could be really ridiculous, and that's okay.
Cool. So, awesome. Yeah. That's a great kind of overview of kind of how Mothergunship's evolved, and I'm really glad that you brought up how you've addressed giving players the freedom to build these guns and not limit them. That's a really good bit of insight. But turning from Mothergunship to kind of your background, we already kind of talked about the history of Mothergunship, so maybe we can go back further and talk about what drew you to first start creating Tower of Guns. What kind of started you on the path of development? Sure.
So that takes us back to 2012.
Way
back. 2012. We can play the shimmery sound. No, so I used to work in AAA games, actually. PC only. I worked on, years and years and years and years and years ago, I worked on a game called Titan Quest, where I did almost every single weapon in that game. And then almost none of the weapons in the expansion pack, which all looked way better because they were done by an awesome artist. And my guns were okay, but I was doing like 10 of them a day, and I didn't have the luxury to spend like 2 days on one weapon. Although he was super fast, too. Think about it. That guy was just badass. That guy was a badass. And I want to work with him again someday. Anyway, that was an aside. I worked on Titan Quest, and then I worked on a bunch of other action RPG things, and then I went to a company called 38 Studios, where I was working on an MMO for a long time, the Kingdoms of Amalur MMO, which was a really interesting experience. I was at that studio. I was probably the 17th or 18th employee, and it ended up being about 300 people by the time it shut down. That studio closed in 2012.
It's a
But
really interesting story. If anybody who's watching this and hasn't looked into the story of Kingdoms of Amalur, it's a very interesting development story.
that's one way to put it. Yeah.
I'm trying to be a little bit political,
Yeah, I mean, it was, oh my gosh, it was a disaster at the end there. But I didn't, it's just being one of the artists there, I didn't really have too much insight into what was going on the higher up side. You had all the development staff, and then you had, the manager choke point, and then you had all of the C-level executives doing their thing up at the top level. We didn't really know what was going on up there, but we were just trying to do our best to make something. And
it's a damn shame that Kingdoms of Amalur got so burdened with all that kind of like the executive crap that came down, because it was I still wish there was more of that game. I thought it was really solid.
Yeah, well, the action RPG was really solid, and there's a long story behind how that came about as well, and that's a different story. But for my own part in the story, I should say that I started there as a general artist, and then eventually became an environment artist, and then a senior environment artist, and then shifted into tech art, where I was the senior tech artist on the environment team. And what was actually happening there the whole time was I was getting more and more technical. And because we were starting from the ground up, and there was nobody who was quite as technical as I was on the team, on the environment team, and this is specifically environment art, I was actually the one who was solving a lot of the problems, and I was prototyping things, and I was choosing what engine to use and how to implement different ideas. And I knew enough to know when, I'd have to run and go get programmer help and stuff, and, closely interacting with all of the programmers as well as all the designers. But it put me into a weird position where I learned how to be a nexus point to a lot of things that were going on. It also put me in a weird position where I suddenly, when 38 closed down, I wasn't really afraid of the idea of making a game on my own from scratch. I was like, I think I could do that. I think I can do this. And I had to learn a lot, don't get me wrong, because my specific tech art role at 38 did not involve any coding, for example. And for Tower of Guns, I had to pick up a whole new scripting language that I had never messed with. But at the same time, it's like I basically felt empowered by what I learned there. Sure. And so there were people left and right who were in really terrible situations when that studio closed. Like, that studio closed, and it left people with weird double mortgages because of the relocation. The studio was basically, I want to say, kind of seduced into moving from Massachusetts to Rhode Island.
Yep.
And there were some really weird situations that came as a result of it going bankrupt shortly after moving to Rhode Island.
Right.
And some people were really screwed. Like, individual artists and designers and programmers were really left out in the cold. And for my own position, I felt like really weird, because I was like, I am not doing badly. I was actually doing pretty well. Like, that studio closing pushed me to go be an indie. And so I started working on Tower Guns almost immediately afterwards. And I set about with the mentality of, if I don't treat this like a game jam, I'll never finish it. And so it's like, if there's a reason that game plays a little bit janky, looks, in my opinion, terrible, and does a lot of weird things, either tech-wise or gameplay-wise. And it's because I was like, this is the way I can solve this problem now. I don't have the luxury of time to think about it and second guess myself. Right. That game was a 20-month development process. Wow. And it came out in 2014. And I actually wrote a blog about it on Gamasutra. It took exactly 3,850 hours to make that game.
Whoa.
So it was a busy time. And then I put an additional like 700 or something hours into it afterwards in patches and updates and stuff. But it was really an experiment. It was like an experiment of, can I do this? Am I capable enough? Can I make the decisions to get something finished? Or am I just going to... And I was very aware of the problem of, when you set out to make a game, it's a lot like writing a novel. It's like, you could set out and feel really excited about it in the beginning, but it's not the beginning that's hard. No. It's like that middle area that's hard. And I was afraid of that. So, and I still am. Even now, having the experience of making games on my own and been doing this for a while, I am terrified of the middle gray zone of the production timeline. Beginning's very easy. Finishing is hard in that it's a lot of work, but at least you have clear. Everybody's kind of aiming towards the clear goal. But in the middle there, everything kind of gets noodly for a little bit, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's like, until everybody starts to come together at the end of a project, this middle area is terrifying. And I knew that even going into Tower Guns. So basically, yeah.
No, that's a fantastic look at kind of how you as a dev evolved and how to kind of that this game came from that. That's fantastic.
It's going to be a sabbatical. I thought I'd do this, and then it'd be like, okay, that was fun. It's a cool resume item. Let's go back to AAA. And then now it's 5 years later.
Not so much.
Right. Or 4 years later. About 4 years later.
We already talked a little bit about like kind of the inspirations. Obviously, there's Tower of Guns, kind of inspiring the gameplay of Mothergunship and Metal Slug and kind of all these other games. But are there any games that you can think back to that were kind of like the linchpin moments that for you were like, I want to make games after playing that game, or that really inspired you to pursue the career?
You don't mean about Mothergunship specifically? Or do you
no,
mean about...
just kind of as you as a developer.
Oh, because I've got some cool ones I could tell you for Mothergunship. But for me as a developer, there's tons. And I was thinking about this recently because that whole... On Twitter, there's been the hashtag recently of GameStuck 4 or 4 GameStuck or whatever it is. And I kind of went through and I was like, oh, man, what would my games be if I were to pick out the 4? And there's tons of really definitive kinds of games for me that I can name. Like Dark Forces was a huge one. I loved playing it. I love the fact that got me into making my own levels. Any game that had a level editor was like, I was there. Like the level editor was something that excited me. Like Warcraft 2, I played it for like maybe 20 hours, but I played with that level editor like nonstop, just tinkering with it. That level editor was great. Dark Forces there was no level editor for it, but someone in the community made one, and I was like on it. I always was always a fan of games that had like level editors built in.
Let you get in there and kick the tires a little bit yourself.
Right. And so like, Hyper Load Runner was a big one for me early on. It was old Game Boy game that nobody even remembers, but I loved because it had a level editor. That expression of that ability to like express, or it wasn't even expressing myself, because I was never really interested in like expressing myself. I was really genuinely from the beginning interested in creating something that I wanted someone else to experiment through. I enjoyed the idea of thinking, what will this person think? Not what do I want to say, but what will that person think when they play through it, and how do I anticipate that and respond? And the stuff I made was terrible, but at the same time, there is evidence of that thought process. And the best example of those kinds of games that are like, and this is not saying this is a terrible game, because this is a great example of a decent game, but it's like of this kind of mindset is the I want to be a guy games. Those games, it's like you can see the developers thinking through every single thing that the player is going to be going through and anticipating it and putting a wall there, some kind of joke or some kind of kill, and like that kind of back and forth conversation between the player and the designer was something I was really excited about, even as like a 10-year-old.
Cool. So
it's like games with level editors got me thinking about how someone would experience the game, even though I didn't get into design until 2012 when that studio closed. Before then, it was all art. Although I guess I'd been tinkering with it. What are some other... Well,
what were some of the ones for Mothergunship? You said there were some interesting inspirations.
Oh, sure. So we were struggling with our meta progression system for a bit. I mean, there's some obvious influences there. The obvious influences are like Doom and Binding of Isaac, randomized content, and Tower of Guns, obviously. But some of the ones that are a little bit less obvious is Steamworld Heist. And this is not my influence. This is not my doing, actually. One of the guys from Grip, Grip's got some really talented people on their team, and one of them was just like, Joe, you need to play Steamworld Heist. I think that they solve a problem we're having in a similar, in a way that's elegant. And I don't want to get too much into what that problem was, but it's like the way that they solved that problem. Well, it's just getting into the nitty gritty stuff of it.
Sure.
The ways that they solved that problem, it's a completely different genre, completely different kind of game, completely different. Like, not just a different genre, it's also active versus passive gameplay.
Sure.
Steamworld Heist is a fantastic game, but when we looked at it, we're like, oh, they have very similar problems here, and they solved, this is basically related to inventory management, and they solved it in a way that their solution, we can borrow those kind of ideas because they solve things in ways that are really useful for us. Another good one would be Darkest Dungeon. The way that they handle meta progression is like really clever. It's not a roguelike anymore, or roguelite rather. I don't know if I could call Darkest Dungeon a roguelite, but whatever it is, it's fun and it works.
Yeah.
And so let's take a page from that book and kind of see what we can do that might be a little similar. And we're not like Darkest Dungeon entirely, but there is some stuff where people could be like, oh, I can see where they were inspired by that.
Very cool.
Yeah, one thing we were not inspired by was Star Fox. Everyone keeps bringing up that frog in the demo, and it's like, you guys were inspired by Slippy there, weren't you? And I'm like, wait, what? Oh man, they're right.
All frogs are Slippy. I mean, that's just how it
I
works.
just didn't even think about it, but the second I thought about it, I was like, man, they're right.
That's funny. So final question we always like to ask any indie devs we talk to is what other indie dev projects out there are catching their eye. So the opportunity to kind of give a shout out to other dev teams, kind of keep the train moving.
Sure. Well, there's always interesting stuff going on, and you can kind of look at what your most recent played games are. Like I can look at what I'm most recently playing through and be excited about a lot of stuff. I'm right at the end of Iconoclasts, which I love. And there's also a very what the heck was it? I was playing right before then. I was playing Salt and Sanctuary, which I thought was awesome.
Salt and Sanctuary is great.
Yeah, great games. But as for stuff that's in development, you want something pretty cool. There's Super Tony Land. I'm really interested in.
I'm very glad that you gave them a shout out.
Yeah, so I'm okay. Disclaimer: I'm friends with Alex and Calvin, the Robot Love Kitty duo.
We did an interview with them, which I'll link somewhere in here. When they were talking Upsilon Circuit,
yes.
which I thought was one of the most inventive and cool ideas to grace the indie land.
Yes, that's a cool idea that takes like 20 million to make.
Yeah, exactly, precisely.
It is a cool idea, though. I'm sad that they decided to can that idea, but what they moved on to was really interesting. And for those of the audience who don't know what Super Tony Land is, it's kind of like co-op Mario Maker with physics that are really weird. So if you imagine Mario Maker where you're putting together these blocks, but you're doing it in the main game itself while you're playing the game, and then you're like building these things that actually have physics engines behind them. So you could like in the middle of the game put all these blocks together and build a gigantic tank that is the level. So it's really bizarre stuff, and it seems like a really, I don't know, I guess open-ended in a fun kind of way. It seems like just a sandbox. Honestly, it seems like a really cool like sandbox to just tinker with. I just want to get in there and be like, let's build stuff that's going to be weird and break it, and that's exciting to me. I think as a gamer, I think that those kinds of things are fun.
Cool. That's a perfect opportunity for us to follow up with them again and talk Super Tony Land this time as opposed to Upsilon Circuit. Joe, thank you for giving us such a great look into the background of Mothergunship and kind of your design thoughts and philosophy and a little bit of a peek into your history as a developer. Mothergunship is going to be coming out 2018 at this point, nothing further than that.
We haven't said the date yet, but I can guarantee you it is not Q1.
For Xbox, PS4, and PC. So we'll have links to all sorts of goodies in the description below. Thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.